everyone, and thank you for joining us for our annual tribute to Black History Month, honoring Black history. I'm Kiera Lake. Over the next half hour, we're going to tell you stories about people from Mid-Michigan who helped change the course of history, who brought diversity to our community, and who inspired others to be their best selves. We'll also talk about an unlikely landmark that altered our past and an unlikely medium that explores our future. But we're going to start our show at Michigan State University, where over the decades, civil rights icons have come to speak. Martin Luther King and Lansing native Malcolm X among them. But today we're focusing on a civil rights leader who was also a Spartan alum. And this is the story of Ernest Greene and his journey on the banks of the Red Cedar.
From Little Rock to East Lansing was a kind of curvy route.
A route that wasn't easy for Ernest Greene, but it was full of learning opportunities. Greene was one of the Little Rock Nine, working to integrate schools as a teenager. And after graduation, 16-year-old Greene received an anonymous scholarship to attend Michigan State.
I'm proud to be a Spartan.
Years later, after being asked to be a commencement speaker, he found out then MSU President John Hannah was his benefactor.
He was writing personal checks for the scholarship.
And Hannah wasn't just signing checks.
He personally interviewed people to be my roommate. I guess he didn't want any Neanderthals giving me a hard time.
Because Hannah probably knew Greene still had important work to do as a student and activist. Greene says while at MSU, parts of East Lansing were segregated.
We picketed Hannah's house. We picketed the probably City Hall of East Lansing. He took the picketing in stride.
At the time, just a few hundred students of color were on campus out of about 27,000. Greene lived in Shaw Hall and as a freshman was in awe by the size of the campus. He worried about making relationships, but soon realized that wouldn't be a problem.
I developed real relationships with football player Herb Adderley, was a big name around here. Joel Ferguson, we came in the same class.
Greene invited Malcolm X to speak on campus after making friends with his brother, who was also an MSU student. He even continued working to desegregate schools in Virginia with MSU researcher Dr. Robert Greene. These are just a few of the connections he made.
Getting to know people from all over the world.
And he hopes current MSU students understand this is a big opportunity.
Everybody has a Little Rock Nine moment in their lives. The question is, do you recognize when it comes, and can you benefit when it's in your lap? And hopefully being at East Lansing, MSU, you recognize those moments and take advantage of it.
And Ernest isn't the only Greene who made his mark on the Black history here in Mid-Michigan. Late last year, Pinecrest Elementary in East Lansing was renamed after Dr. Robert L. Greene. In 1964, his family became the first Black family to move to the city. 6 News chief photographer David Parks attended the renaming ceremony. He takes us there too.
Today's event is more than just giving a new name to this school, though. The renaming of this building represents so much more.
Renaming the school allows all of us to honor Dr. Greene, his intelligence, his dedication, his family. It allows us to preserve his legacy as a tireless supporter of civil rights.
I feel honored, deeply honored. It's good to be back in East Lansing, a beautiful community, very different from what it was years ago.
And thank all of you for coming out. I see a lot of familiar faces.
we come back, we're going to introduce you to another African-American man who made his mark on Mid-Michigan's history. We'll talk about the man who made an impact during and after the Civil War. That story when Honoring Black History returns. After more than a year of research, some residents studying Owasso's history stumbled upon a long-forgotten war veteran. The city honored him late last year for his service to his country and to his community. But what makes this story so unique is that the man fought for his country in the Civil War, and he was one of the few black men committed to the city. 6 News reporter Yamarisa Say was at the ceremony, and she's here for you now with his story.
He was a self-supporting professional, a barber, a well-regarded member of the community.
Alexander Johnson was also a Civil War veteran whose story was lost in history.
What we are hearing in little bits and pieces is not the whole picture, and we want to look at the big picture of Owasso.
Johnson was born a slave in Tennessee in 1833, where he later ran away. In 1865, he joined the Union Regiment with other African Americans in Kalamazoo to fight in the Civil War. After the war, he moved to Canada where he married. Then, in 1870, he settled down in Owasso with his wife.
Not sure exactly what brought them to Owasso, but there are two possibilities. One is that her brother also was in Owasso.
Another possibility, he and many other African Americans moved because of a home that served as an underground railroad. Johnson opened up a barbershop, but in 1871,
Tensions between black residents and white residents, and that tension unfortunately ended with about 40 white vigilantes gathering together and driving out the black residents of Owasso.
Johnson and 2 others were the only ones who weren't chased out.
We don't know why they chose to stay, nor do we know the names or the stories of the black individuals that were driven from our community in 1871. But we do know that Alexander Johnson stayed, that he was welcomed by the community, and that he led a prosperous life here.
Today, the Owasso Rotary Club and others met at his gravesite to honor him.
It's a unique situation, and there weren't very many African-American people that were in Owasso, and so we want to highlight that there was.
I think it's good to get this out and for people to learn this, and I think that will be very meaningful to people.
Yamarisa Say, 6 News.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at an unlikely landmark that caused a racial rift. We'll tell you how it's being remembered and how it led to an unlikely reunion. That's when our special Honoring Black History returns. Most people in Mid-Michigan think Interstate 496 is a great way to get from one side of town to another in a hurry. But for some others, the highway also stands as a sordid symbol of Lansing's past. A once thriving black community on Lansing's west side was wiped away when Interstate 496 was built. It was remembered recently with an art exhibit called Pave the Way. It taught people about the community that once prospered there. It told stories through artifacts, high school pictures, and even shows people the aftermath of when the freeway was built in 1964. The layout let the whole community peek in, become more educated, and pay their respects. The coordinator for Pave the Way says she hopes the community can understand the hardships people faced when they were forced from their homes.
They will learn from this exhibit. They will feel from this exhibit the humanity of what happened and what people go through. And it's just not history, dates, and facts. This is real lived stories, real lived experiences. And what I truly hope is that one day the city of Lansing will have an exhibit that's permanent that highlights the contributions of African American people and other minority people who've contributed to this land and to the city.
The exhibit, which was arranged by the Historical Society of Greater Lansing, documented the deconstruction of a historic black neighborhood. But almost 50 years later, the opening of the exhibit also helped bring people together, literally. Samana Sheikh is here for you now to show us how it happened.
Nobody really let my family know that a highway was coming. I can remember the day I went home and told my mother and father that a highway is coming. And my dad said, You're crazy.
More than 50 years ago, 88-year-old Frank Spagnuolo was a young man living in a thriving neighborhood filled with minorities. He worked at his family's candy store.
I was born in 1933, so when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, everybody that walked up and down that street you knew and you talked to. And everybody was Mr., ma'am, yes. Everybody was polite.
But that community he remembers was destroyed in 1964 during the construction of Interstate 496. Spagnuolo says he lost his friends, the store, and his home when his family was forced to relocate.
They must have cried all day because they lived in that store, since 1927.
Fast forward to now when Spagnuolo found out about the Pave the Way exhibit highlighting his old neighborhood. He knew he needed to be there on its opening day. What he didn't know, he'd be running into an old friend.
I just met 3 or 4 people that I knew when they were little boys. And I didn't remember them. The name I did. They remembered me. That's what I like.
Frank's store was right next to our house. There was an alley separating the two. So that was my favorite place to go and get candy because it was just literally 30 seconds and I was in the store.
Penniston Adolph Burton once also lived in the torn-down neighborhood. He says running into Spagnuolo offered a sense of relief.
It was lovely. It was so lovely because Frank, as well as being a friend with myself, he was a real good friend of my dad's too. And he was the sponsor of the football team I played on.
And Spagnuolo remembered Adolph Burton's family right away.
I remember his father. He was a Superman.
They looked at the artifacts, sat together during the entire grand opening event, and now they hope our generation can learn from this exhibit about the devastating reality of what happened to their people.
I just want them to not forget that there were businesses there, there were homes there were churches there people were there, and a way of life was taken away. That's the most important thing.
Here for you in Lansing, Samana Sheikh, 6 News.
And still ahead, we're going to switch from looking at history to looking at the future. And we're going to do it through an unusual lens. We'll tell you how a local collection of comic books could set the stage for what's to come. That's next on Honoring Black History. We'll be right back. You've likely seen movies or read books that were set in the future, and sometimes some of those predictions come to pass. But did you know there was a genre that explores Afrofuturism? It's a part of the African American culture that few know about, and at Michigan State University, there's an exhibit that explores the concept using a medium you might not expect. Shamir Owens takes us on a virtual walkthrough and talks to the man behind it all.
Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic that explores the African American experience, and Julian Chambliss says its main focus is
liberation and safety and care. So these are central concerns of people of color.
This genre brings to life a world where African Americans and their culture is at the center.
It is a movement that is rooted in a kind of decentralization of European or Eurocentric ideas.
Chambliss says community is an important part of Afrofuturism.
You make a better future, right? You create a more equitable system, one where not just simply the individual, but the collective is protected.
This political, social, and artistic movement is one that Chambliss enjoys experiencing through comic books.
Comics are a very accessible medium most of the time. Most people are not put off by comics. They can be put off by many artistic modes, but most people are like, oh, I like comics. I've read a comic. When you're working in that medium, you really immediately get a chance to draw people in.
And his love for comic books and passion for the African American culture inspired him to create a virtual exhibition with the MSU Museum to help others understand the history of Afrofuturism. It's called Beyond the Black Panther, Visions of Afrofuturism in American Comics.
A lot of it is about trying to accomplish a set of transformative learning outcomes, recovering things that people probably don't know, showing them different sort of themes that unify.
In this exhibit, Chambliss wants others to see the history of Afrofuturism before and after Black Panther.
There's more happening here then you know, but you understand Black Panther and you like it. So let's build on that.
The exhibit features different displays of comic books like The Lion Man, Ojala, The Invention of E.J. Whitaker, and Black Panther. Chambliss says MSU was the best place for his exhibit and that he hopes to not only inform others about Afrofuturism, but to also make them aware of Black creators.
I really wanted to get people to think, like, there are a lot of Black comic book creators that are making comics. Some of them are like right around the corner. MSU is a perfect place for this because we have this very large comic book collection. So it just sort of came together really perfectly.
And if you'd like to take a closer look at this exhibit, there is a link available on our website at WLNS.com. Well, coming up on Honoring Black History, we're going to introduce you to a local legend here in Mid-Michigan. It's a story about a man who coached and mentored some of the nation's greatest athletes for almost 50 years and who broke a bunch of barriers in the process. We'll have his story when we come back. Michigan State athletics has been on the forefront of integration and inclusion ever since the 1960s. And 1968 would prove to be another monumental moment. It's the year Biggie Munn hired Jim Bibbs to be the Spartans track and field coach, making him not only the first African-American coach at Michigan State, but in the Big Ten. As our sports director, Audrey Dahlgren, learned, it turned out to be one of the greatest things to ever happen to Bibbs, as well as the university.
This picture down here is Madeline Mann. She's the first young lady to win the half mile for the United States. And I was fortunate to have had her and quite a few great ones on my Pan American team that I coached.
You'll often hear people say the true measure of a man is in the lives he's touched, and at 92 years young, Jim Bibbs has mastered the art of connecting with and helping others.
This Taylor Manson, I know you read about her. She made the Olympic team from East Lansing High School.
You can feel it and see it as soon as you walk into his East Lansing home. It's filled with pictures of not only his former athletes, but athletes who love and participate in the sport of track and field today, because in his mind, it's the best sport there is.
I love track and field mainly because it's an individual sport. There's no excuses, In football, if you don't do well, you can tell your girlfriend they didn't block for me. Basketball, you can tell your girlfriend that they didn't throw me the ball enough. But track and field, I tell them no matter who you date, and same thing goes for girls participate with her spouse too. They can see that you started, everybody started together. They saw you all the way around that track. They know nobody bothered you. And then they count when you come in. So you cannot tell her nobody did nothing to you.
Accountability is big in Bibbs' book, and it played a major role in his success at Michigan State. His first year of coaching at MSU was in 1968, and when Clarence Biggie Munn initially called him about the job, he didn't quite believe it.
At that point in time, Biggie was big man. I was honored to get a call from Biggie. That's one of the reasons I had very little trouble when I got to Michigan State, because Biggie hired me and definitely seemed to like me. So at that point in time, Biggie and Duffy, like you, they just about run that athletic department at Michigan State. So everybody better pretend they like it, they don't like it.
Bibbs knew his hire was significant at the time, but nowadays he realizes even more just how important it was. However, it is not what defines his life or his legacy. It always has been and always will be about helping others.
They say it takes a village to raise a child, and I'm part of that village.
In East Lansing, Audrey Dahlgren, 6 Sports.
Well, thank you for taking the time to help honor Black history and for honoring the men and women who have and who will make a difference in our lives, past, present, and future.